You're listening to the Modern Motherhood Podcast presented by All Mom Does, and I'm your host, Julie Lyles Carr. Today, I have a guy on who is a proud homeschool father of 4 babies. He is a writer, a director, a really celebrated cinematographer. His name is Jon Erwin, and he has put out a new movie called I Can Only Imagine. Getting to talk to Jon is like getting to talk to an old friend. You're going to hear so many great things about inspiring creativity in our kids and how to think about stories that we want to tell. And we're going to have a great conversation about Christians in the creative space, film and cinema, family relationships, the story behind the story, and much, much more. So, Jon, thanks so much for being with us today.
It's Julie. Thanks for having me, and I'm honored to be here. And ultimately, we work for the fans. Everything we do is for people sitting in the seat watching the movie. And if you keep watching them, we get to keep making them. And so it's an honor. We just got one of the coolest jobs in the world, and to be able to tell stories that entertain, but also uplift and inspire, and stories that transform people's lives is a pretty magical thing to be able to do. And so we're honored to do it. So thanks for having me.
It is a super cool job. And I've got the list in front of me, so you're not bragging because I'm asking. Go ahead and tell our listeners, give us the short list of all the films that you've been involved in the last few years.
Well, thinking about your mom's podcast, we made a film called Mom's Night Out that was literally like a Hallmark card to my wife and everyone like her. And it was a great fun to make that movie. Our first film was called October Baby. Mom's Night Out was our second. Woodlawn was our third feature film, which really they say a filmmaker finds his story and just tells it over and over again. And I think with Woodlawn, we discovered the magic and power of a true story. And so we've really been focusing on that ever since. And we did a documentary called Steve McQueen, American Icon, also a true story. And there's just power in the truth, And then I think it all kind of culminates with I Can Only Imagine, the story behind the best-selling, most played Christian song of all time, and a song that's had a deep impact on my life. And I think that for me, this is by far the most special thing that we've ever done, and an incredible film to watch with an audience. And it's just been fun we say chase progress, not perfection, which is a great life principle, and just to just get the films a little better every time, and to be able to entertain an audience. It's a pretty magical thing to do.
Now, I'm going to be sharing, and we're going to be sharing with the listeners here in a little bit, kind of the story behind the song and also the story behind Steve McQueen, which I loved watching that documentary as well. Yeah. But in the interest of that, in honoring that, let's go back a little bit for you, the story behind the film producer and writer and director. You and your brother Andrew started out running cameras in your hometown of Birmingham, Alabama. Talk about that, and how did that parlay into filmmaking?
We did. Well, first of all, we're talking about moms. I have an amazing mother and father. And I had to do kindergarten twice because I was an ADHD disturbance to the class. It wasn't my grades that were on the line. It was everyone else's. They were like, for sake of everyone else, Jon, you need to stay right here. So my mom took me home and homeschooled me. And when I was 15, I was an intern for a cameraman from my church at an ESPN football game at the University of Alabama. A cameraman got sick about 4 hours before the kickoff, and I got to take their place. I'm not recommending this to the mothers and children out there, but there were some child labor laws that were probably not thoroughly followed. But I neglected to inform them of my age and took the place of this cameraman. My dad drove me over to the stadium and dropped me off 4 blocks away because I didn't want anybody to know I couldn't drive. And I just had the time of my life. I had so much fun, and I met one of the great obsessions of my life and passions of my life, which was the entertainment business. And went from this Christian kid from Alabama that didn't know anyone, who didn't think or look like I did, to being the only Christian out in a madhouse, almost like the Pirates of the Caribbean. But that's really where my faith became real to me, and I learned to love it. And so that led to kind of a career as a cameraman for ESPN. The next year, my dad bought my brother and I a camera. I thought I will never pray for anything else in my life because this camera is so cool. And we started doing videos, and he taught us 2 things. He taught us the wow factor, just try to make people say wow. And then he said, guys, dream bold, dream big, dream the impossible, which is what we've been doing ever since. And we just started making all kinds of videos. And finally, the music artists Michael W. Smith and Amy Grant gave us a break to do music videos. And that kind of launched a career in Nashville doing music videos. But it was just a career. And then it was on the set of a Christian film called Courageous. I came in to do the second unit directing, which is like the action sequences. I love to chase things and blow things up on film, and they needed some help doing stunt work, which is obviously so much fun, but always about safety and, getting the right people. And so it was my job to come and do that. And Alex, the director of that film, said, Jon, what is your purpose and the purpose of your work? And it all just happened. It was just a practice track that at that point had been going for over 10 years, it just happened. God kind of wrote our story. Not only could I not stop thinking about the question, I couldn't answer it. So that was kind of a transition point for us to use our abilities for a purpose beyond ourselves.
How important do you think it is for parents to leave some wiggle room for their kids to be able to explore some of those creative spaces? For example, we've homeschooled, and partially for some of the reasons you're talking about, that some of our kiddos, it would have been interesting for them to have been in a traditional classroom. But part of it too, we actually we weren't trying to protect our kids. We were trying to protect everybody else. Maybe is how that works in homeschooling.
Star Trek, it's the needs of the many outweighing the needs of the few.
Right. It really is for the good of the community. Anyway. But one of my children really got deep into and spent quite a bit of time doing stop action videos with his Lego figurines. And he really had a gift for it and ran with it. And it's been able to translate into some different opportunities for him now as a young adult. And I think about Steven Spielberg's mom. He would laugh about his mom would take him out of school and drive him to the desert and let him take videos. So if you've got these creatives living in your house, how do you still parent well? But what did you learn from the way your parents handled it in terms of letting you and Andrew have some space to explore that?
You know what I love that my parents did? My dad never told me what to dream, but he really supported the dreams that I had. So whenever I got really interested in something, he was there to empower it. And that included doing things like using money that he didn't have. We didn't have a lot of money to buy me a camera, and then helped me get a loan when I was 16. Just gave us that entrepreneurial spirit and drove me to the game, with ESPN, and was always there for all the successes and failures, and gave us a little wiggle room. I mean, I think, as parents, you got to let your kids fail. Failure is the great teacher in life. And, you don't want to let them fail catastrophically, but you also don't want to never let them fail at all. And I remember the second game that I did for ESPN, I did this first one, then a crewing agent called me and said, "Are you a freelance camera operator in Birmingham?" I'd never heard those three words before. And so I said, "Well, of course I am. That's what I do." And so I went down to Auburn to do a game, and I was this hot shot. I was cocky, and I had not yet learned the cameraman's job to just give the director what he needs. And so I was zooming the camera in and out, and then I heard some words from the director that I had not quite heard before about me and my mother and all these things. And so all of a sudden this kid weeping, I'm crying on the camera, what have I gotten myself into? But, I learned a great lesson. And I think sometimes it's important to support the dreams that they had. And my dad did that for me and help them confront their fears. I think that, genius is out there on the other side of fear and out there on the limb. And I remember when I was 5 years old, my dad, we would go to this park in Atlanta called Whitewater. It's a great water park. There was this slide there called Dragon's Tail, just this really tall slide. And from a 5-year-old mind, it looked like this slide stretched into the stratosphere. And I remember we went up all the stairs to the top of the slide, and it looked like you could see the earth bending. It's like we were in the substratosphere of the space. And I remember my dad, and I was terrified. And I remember my dad said he didn't berate me for being afraid, and he also didn't baby me by just saying, "Okay, you don't have to do this today." He said, "I know this is scary, but I'll tell you this, if you go down this slide, I'll buy you Dusty." And Dusty was a G.I. Joe that I had wanted ever since I had been born, I thought, at least at that time. And buying a G.I. Joe was a really big deal. So I stared at the barrel of the slide and convinced that I was going to die. But I really wanted a G.I. Joe, and so I closed my eyes and pushed off and confronted my fear and loved it and did it 12 more times that day. But what I learned and what my dad taught me was that, you can face your fears, and if you're passionate about something just a little more than you are afraid of it, you can move forward, and that goals in life are going to scare you. And so, I have many lessons that I learned from my dad, and again, he was very gracious to teach, but not to tell us what to dream of, but really support the dreams that we had.
I love that. And in your newest film, I Can Only Imagine, which opens on March 16th, you give us the story behind the sudden major hit song by the same name. And you were telling us, one of the absolutely most loved Christian hits of all time, and also became a major crossover hit as well. What about the story behind the song, and it's the story of Bart Millard? What about that story compelled you? And I'm going to let you decide how many of, the takeaways or how many of the reveal you're going to give. But what about the story compelled you?
There's always a story behind the moment of success. And whether that is, Malcolm Gladwell in his book Outliers called it the 10,000-hour rule. There's like 10,000 hours before a moment of success. This idea of an overnight success doesn't exist. Success is obedience in the same direction. And so to any dreamer out there, it's important to know that it's about patience more than anything else, and determination, and just about never giving up if God has called you to do something. And it certainly was like that for Bart. And so I love the story behind the story. And what is that? How did this thing that we all know about come to be? And of course, I can only imagine, this is the best-selling, most played Christian song of all time. It also charted on many country and pop charts as well. And it crossed over, was the most requested song on a lot of top 40 stations, and became this like worldwide phenomenon that certainly touched me. I mean, that song was like an anchor in my life at certain points of fame, you know. And so, of course, I'm a huge fan. Come to find out, there's this incredible story behind the song that nobody knows about. And I remember I was hooked on this story when we were doing the interview with Bart. The pre-interview is kind of like kicking the tires to see if what was there. And I asked him, I said, Bart, if I were to put a gun to your head and say, is God real? What do you say? And he said, absolutely. And I said, how do you know? And he said, because of the transformation I saw in my dad. He said, I watched a monster change into my best friend and the man I wanted to become. And there's just no other reason for it. There's no other way to describe it than his relationship with Christ and what God did in both our lives. And it was the mending of that relationship, of a broken relationship, that inspired this incredible song that has given hope to millions and millions of people. At that point, I was just hooked on the story of a redemption and reconciliation between a father and son. And just that message that it's never too late, and you're never too far gone, and that God can change any person or any situation. And that idea that this dreamer kid from Texas, with the odds stacked against him, wrote a song that touched the world. To this day, it was a really cool story. We say we're supposed to do something when we can't stop thinking about it. And the story was so good. It's almost like if it didn't really happen, you couldn't write it. It's just that good that we just knew that, okay, we got to make this film.
Got to make a film. You know, I recently heard on an interview on the Carey Nieuwhof Leadership Podcast, which, by the way, I have an honorable and appropriate crush on him. But I mean, it's an amazing podcast. So everybody should go listen. It's a Carey Nieuwhof Leadership Podcast. We'll put it in the show notes. And his guest was Chris Valaton, who's a pastor at Bethel. And Carey asked Chris what Chris saw as a particular heart's cry for this generation in the church today, what seems to have the most impact on this generation. And Chris said, I mean, without hesitation, just boom. He said it's broken relationships with fathers, those who feel fatherless. And I noticed in both, I Can Only Imagine, your newest film that's coming out in March, and then also in the amazing documentary you have on Steve McQueen, which that backstory is incredible, and that's available now.
Amazing.
It is. It's coming out on digital and DVD, so people can be looking for that. Steve McQueen, American Icon. That central theme of relationship with the father is so permeates both of these stories. What do you think it is about the relationship with the father that's pivotal? And again, we're speaking to a lot of moms on this podcast, but for even us as moms to understand our relationships with our own fathers, or if we're raising kids who dad's not in the picture, or, you know, to honor the dads of our kids and make sure we're keeping those relationships close. So what is it about the relationship of the father that you learned through the making of these two films?
What's interesting about it is when Jesus comes on the scene of history, he says, when you pray, pray like this, our Father who art in heaven. And he brings this different metaphor for God, which is as a father and that relationship. And I think the genius of that is it's something that we can all identify with. I mean, we all have a story with our dad, and a father and son. It's just a very powerful relationship. And I think something that's very, very relatable. And so with both the stories that you mentioned, I Can Only Imagine and Steve McQueen, American Icon, you find in the case of Steve McQueen, he was just looking for his dad. I mean, he was on a search for a father. And I think in some cases, many of us are. I have a great relationship with my dad, and yet this is still very, very relatable. And Bart had this incredibly troubled relationship with his dad. And his dad was, as he described him, a monster. And yet, this monster decided to change and decided to let God change him deep into the fourth quarter of his life. And what I love is it was that fourth quarter turnaround where he screwed up the majority of his life. And yet this last turn, this redemption, inspired a song that's given hope to millions of people. So what a great story, that it's just never too late to reconcile. It's never too late to find transformation and forgiveness in your own life and in your relationships. And I think so many people live under this cycle of shame that they can't change. They've screwed it up too much. And as men, we run from what we're not good at. And many of us run from our families because we just don't feel competent. And here's a story of a guy changing, right at the end, and the power of that redemption and reconciliation. And the cool thing is to see what's happening. Like I was in a screening the other day. Somebody told me a story that somebody saw the film in an early screening and had not seen their dad since they were 14, and found them on Facebook in the theater and met with them the next day and forgave them and reconciled and shared Christ with them. I got another text with someone that said somebody just texted them, because of watching this movie, I've made the phone call I've known I needed to make for 18 years, and it's so cool to see. The last verse of the Old Testament is about bringing the hearts of the fathers to their sons and the sons to their fathers. And so I think that there's something very redemptive and special about that theme and relatable to that theme. And so much so that, it's been a big part of our last two projects.
Wow, incredible. We'll be back with our conversation with all-around Renaissance man, Jon Erwin. But first, I want to make sure that you're getting into community with other moms in your part of the world. There's a fantastic opportunity for you called MOPS. For over 40 years, MOPS has been inviting women into community through the commonality of motherhood, building friendships, and earning the opportunity to share Jesus with them, maybe for the first time. MOPS believes that all moms are world influencers and exists to encourage and equip all moms everywhere to live their best lives. Check out mops.org to find a local gathering in your neighborhood. Well, in the new film, I Can Only Imagine, which is the story of that major hit song we all know from Mercy Me, I Can Only Imagine, and the story of Bart, the guy who wrote it, and the backstory to it. Mm-hmm. You've got such a strong cast for this film. You did a lot of the filming in Oklahoma, which speaks to my heart. My husband and I lived there for 15 years, and man, really? Oklahomans are the best. I love having, 6 of my kids were born in Oklahoma.
They're
I love
amazing.
having that heritage.
Yeah.
But, you've got an amazing cast. Dennis Quaid plays Bart's dad. And, of course, I have a rocket scientist daddy. And so Dennis Quaid in The Right Stuff, that was canon at my house. We had to watch The Right Stuff to graduate out of the Lyles household. Yeah. And you've got Priscilla Shire. You've got Trace Atkins. Again, another one I have an honorable, righteous, appropriate crush on, like Carrie Newhoff. Trace Atkins is amazing.
Trace.
Yes.
That's awesome.
And Cloris Leachman, wow. But J. Michael Finley plays the role of Bart, and he's a Broadway guy. How did you encounter him?
Oh, man.
And what a voice. He's amazing.
What a story.
How'd you find him?
What a kid.
Oh, yeah.
This is his first movie, believe it or not. He's got the best natural instincts of any actor I've ever worked with. And the story of finding him is a miracle in and of itself. It's just amazing. The cast of the movie, they're a great team. A great cast is a great team, and we're honored to work with some spectacular actors over the course of our careers, whether that's John Voight and Whitlaw or Sean Astin, and many, many others. But one of the things that we love is to really empower and discover emerging talent. As Christians, we need more people in the entertainment business, and we love to find them. So what I can only imagine, that the big challenge was to find someone to play Bart. I was adamant that this kid has to sing the songs. We can't overdub it. It's got to be his voice. So where do you find kind of a stocky, gruff, with a middle American grit guy that looks like Bart that has the voice of an angel? Good luck. And so I was in New York working, and I'm a history nut, and so American history. And so I wanted to go see Hamilton, and of course I couldn't because I was not a celebrity and didn't have $10,000. And so and even if I was, it was still 6 months away. It was the nearest ticket. And so I went next door to see Les Mis, and I love Les Mis and I love the music. And the understudy to Jean Valjean was J. Michael. And yet that vocal is so difficult. It's one of the most difficult vocals on Broadway that the main actor could really only do it 3 or 4 times a week, mainly the weekend performances. And so John Michael took over 60 of the performances as Valjean. And so to see him play Valjean and these iconic songs like Bring Him Home, it was just amazing. Just mesmerizing. And then to meet with him after the show, and we found out that, number one, he had just submitted an online audition to I Can Only Imagine, which was amazing, and his dad is a pastor from Missouri, and he saw Mercy Me play 3 times in high school at youth camp. Talk about a needle in a haystack and just a miracle, and this kid crushes it. This is his first movie. It will not be his last. He's a rare talent. And most Broadway actors, you have to kind of like tame them back because they project to the back wall. Film is a very intimate medium. John Michael has the best instincts of a film actor I've ever worked with before, and just an extraordinary talent. And so the idea was then to surround him with an all cast, and that began with Dennis Quaid, and just an icon in his own right. It's like having Michael Jordan on the set, and he gives a very vulnerable, authentic, unique performance in his body of work. It's just amazing. And there's this scene in the film where the movie stops almost. There's no music, there's no camera tricks. And it's the scene in this kitchen where at his dad's house where his dad's trying to apologize to him. And this gruff Texan is trying to humble himself and reconcile. And John Michael, who's playing Bart, doesn't know if he can forgive, and he's wrestling with all his anger. And it's amazing. I mean, the movie just lifts to a whole new level, and their performances in that scene, I'm so proud of both of them. Trace Atkins is our second film with Trace, and Dennis Quaid's first film was in 1976 with Cloris Leachman.
Oh, really?
Who was in this movie, Academy Award winner, and I love her, Mary Tyler Moore. I think it's one of the great TV shows. So it's an all-star cast. Madeline Carroll is an incredible young person, kind of living out her faith in Los Angeles, and so it's just a wonderful group of people all around. Priscilla Shire, it's her first film since War Room, and she's just great. And I think it makes Andy and I just look so much better than we are, because of how great their performances are.
And I thought Brody Rose, who played Bart as a younger boy, was
so good.
So good. I mean, he's fantastic.
Here's a life hack for the directors out there, the world, or the filmmakers. When you're casting kids, cast the eyes. And he had those big eyes. I mean, just those big puppy dog eyes. And you fell in love with his eyes, and he's a great kid and does great. And it's a fun sequence of Bart and Shannon falling in love as kids, which is exactly how it happened.
It's so great, and those kids are fantastic. And part of Bart's story is tough. I mean, we're talking about an abusive father, a really broken home, all kinds of different things that went down. So how did you navigate that lane of being real in the story and telling it as it really happened and using child actors in that part of the story? That's a hard part of what happened. How did you navigate that? Keep it in the faith lane so moms can feel comfortable taking kids, but at the same time, really make sure that we're being honest about exactly what it was like and what they went through as a family.
That was one of the big difficulties in the story, and a big decision that we had to make. And for Andy and I, trust is the big word that's important to us. If it has our name on it, you can trust it. You can trust it with your family. You're not going to be disappointed. And so we wanted to portray this story in a way that was accessible for families, because I think it's a great film to watch with families, and yet it deals with a very tough issue. And so, we want to deal with it in a PG way, which is what the film is rated. And I think you can. I think there's ways to do that. And I think that what we settled on is that, the shark is scarier in Jaws because you don't see it, And so that was the idea that we went with, is you felt the presence of this guy and Arthur and his dad and how bad it was, but we don't show anything, violent or anything that would scare any kids. And what that enables us to do is unravel the story like the layers to an onion, where you get to the end of the movie, Bart's dad is trying to apologize. It's like the table literally flips, and now Bart's dad is trying to humble himself. They begin to talk about what happened, and it's more of a revelation. You don't quite realize how bad it was because of the way we've dealt with the issue. And I think this is a very real issue. And I think that there's a lot of dads that are ashamed of what they've done and who they've become or the dad that they've been. And I think that this story offers a lot of hope for reconciliation, no matter how bad it is. There is no relationship that is beyond God's grace and God's power to redeem and restore. And that's the theme of this story. So it's cool to see relationships reconcile, even in the theater. People are going to text, I saw this film and it's given me the courage to make the call I've known I needed to make for 18 years, And so the idea was to tell the story in an emotional, entertaining, and safe way. You'll laugh, you'll cry, you'll cheer. But I really do believe, having watched this movie with thousands of people, that our goal was to match the song, in that we asked Bart early on, what do people feel when they hear this song? Why in the world would an independent Christian band from Texas write the best-selling, most played Christian song ever? And it charted well beyond the Christian space. What is the phenomenon of I Can Only Imagine? And he said, it's a rush of hope. It's a rush of hope. You feel hope. So that was our goal, because I said, I think people are going to come in wanting to feel the same way, your fans, and if we don't give that feeling to them, they're going to burn our house down or something, because the fans are so avid for this song. The trailers to I Can Only Imagine, like Woodlawn, my last film, the trailer had like 2.5 million views on Facebook. The trailers to Imagine, the teaser and the trailer, have about 75 million views. It's like they're beating Star Wars, on Facebook. And so I really think you're going to feel that. That was the whole goal, was to say, I want people to feel that same rush of hope in an even much greater way that they felt when they heard the song originally. That's the goal.
Right.
And I think that's what happens when you see the film.
I think you nailed it. You alluded to this earlier, but I want to go back to it for just a minute. I myself, as a creative, I've raised a passel of creatives. We love the arts. I love great literature and film and paintings and all the things. And yet, I think we've had a little bit of a valley to some degree. You know, the Christian church for a long time was sort of the provenance of the great arts because,
you got it.
You know, the kings would commission for these incredible symphonies to be developed that would be played within the church, the people who built the cathedrals, the people who were populating the choirs, and the most beautiful places, the most leading edge in the arts was the provenance of the church for many, many years. And that began to change. So talk about the importance of believers infiltrating the arts today and why we need to be going there, even though it can feel like dangerous territory sometimes.
It is dangerous territory, but so was Rome in the first century. You know, walk into the Sistine Chapel, you understand that we weren't always behind when it comes to the arts. And you're right, the church was a curator for the best of the best, of the arts. The ultimate art is storytelling. It's not filmmaking. And we serve the greatest storyteller of all time. So this should be something that we're industry leaders in. And I think that, unfortunately, for many reasons, we've gotten behind culturally with the arts. And I think that there's a belief that something that's a Christian work of art has to be only for Christians or subpar or cheesy or what have you. And that's just not true. So our main core value, Andy and I, is quality. And the idea of what we say is, first of all, we claim the words of George Lucas. He said films are never complete; they're only abandoned, and so you get them as far as you can. But it's time that we reach higher and we go further. Our logo is our grandfather's airplane from World War II. He received the Congressional Medal of Honor in World War II, an amazing act of heroism. And the embodiment of the Medal of Honor, which is our nation's highest award, is to go above and beyond the call of duty, do more than is required of you. Ultimately, this is a biblical concept. Jesus said, if a man asks you to go 1 mile, go 2, and go further. And I think that as artists, it's time that we understand, first of all, film is not an art form, in my opinion, as much as it's a craft. It's a symphony art. That's what makes it so powerful. There's all these different bundled art forms, but they're bundled together in a craft. And a craft is something that you learn incrementally over a long period of time and that you master as a life's work. I think that we've forgotten that the Bible is filled with long seasons of preparation for short seasons of influence. And we've forgotten to hold as sacred not only the message, but also the craft. And I think it's time that we have the attitude of earning the message that we care so deeply about, not using it as a crutch for a bad product. And I'm very optimistic. I think we've only just begun. Entertainment is America's second largest export behind agriculture. This is a way to touch the world with a story.
Right.
But we have to get those stories bigger, and we have to get those stories better. And we have to remember that the movie ticket is the same price for my movie as it is for Star Wars. The popcorn is the same price. The amount of time it takes to go to a movie is the same. So let's earn it, and let's reach, and let's go further. Quality is we say it's an aspiration, but never an accomplishment. It's just something that we're pushing further and further for, and we're killing ourselves to make the films as great as they can be. And I think if we could adopt that as a mindset, a lot would change, and a lot would change quickly. And I think ultimately a lot of it is changing. I think, if you look at Christian music and what they made it, what it was then, and then what they've lifted it to now, it's this platform where many, many artists, young voices like Lauren Daigle or great groups like Bethel and Hillsong are doing, in my opinion, great music in its own right. And there's a place where these young people can survive and thrive and make a living. We hope to do the same with movies. That's our goal. And it's funny, Sean Astin told us on Woodlawn, he said, I see you guys as frontiersmen and pioneers. And we said, that's what we want to do. We want to blaze the trail. There's a generation coming behind us that's better, and we want to make a place for them. The trail will be clearly marked, and we will be frozen pointing to the summit or something. I don't know. But I just think that we can kind of climb on each other's backs and each person goes a little further, and we can lift this thing out of its reputation, and that can happen quicker than we all think, in my opinion.
There's a quote that I love that says, may my ceiling become your floor, to the next generation.
I'm going to steal that quote. I'm absolutely going to steal that quote.
I don't know who said it first, but you can just credit me. How about that?
Yeah. I'll give you another quote. Originality is just forgetting the source. So it's yours now.
Okay, I'm going to use that one. Well, give the moms out there, what do you think age-wise for this film is good for them when it comes to taking their kids? Because they're all going to want to take their kids after hearing these amazing things you have to say. We designed it to be a PG movie that is accessible to families. There's no language in it. There's nothing inappropriate.
I would feel comfortable taking my 9-year-old and my 7-year-old to see the film. I wouldn't take my 3 or 1-year-old of what they would do to the other people seeing the film in the movie theaters. But I would feel comfortable taking my kids, and I've seen it with my daughter. And it's interesting. Dennis Quaid saw it and loved it. And he has 2 9-year-old twins. And it really got to his daughter. And he said, I've had the first conversations about God with my kids ever. Thank you for this movie. So a movie can spark a conversation that can be very powerful. So we look forward to everyone seeing. It's March 16th. 3/16 is a great easy. That was a total mistake, but it's an easy.
It's awesome though. Yeah.
For Christians, it was an accident, but a nice one. And I can't wait for people to see the film. It's just a very, very special experience for all of us.
Hey, 3/16 worked for Tim Tebow, right? So just remember John 3/16, John Irwin.
It's an easy date to remember. Yeah. There you go.
Remember, I'm
John, and my movie opens on 3/16. There you go. That's fun. I'm going to use that as well.
There you go. Well, we're so excited for this film to hit. We know it's going to be amazing. Again, March 16th is the date. And go back and take a look at the Steve McQueen American Icon documentary. It's fantastic, available now on digital and by DVD. Yes. And so, John, thank you so much for having the courage and the tenacity to hang in there, make movies of inspiration, the story behind the stories. And I'm just so excited to see what our All Mom Does, the Modern Motherhood podcast community, thinks about this film. Just all the best to you as you continue in this sacred space of storytelling.
I thank you for what you do and for your podcast. And, it's a movie it's a line that we put in Mom's Night Out. The hand that rocks the cradle is indeed the hand that rules the world. And we're honored to get to make these films. And to the dreamers out there, young and old, if God's calling you to do something, the key is just to never give up, just to keep going no matter what obstacles you face.
John Irwin, we wish you all the best on your awesome new movie, I Can Only Imagine, and that comes out in theaters on March 16th. Be sure and check it out. Your family's going to love it. I would love to connect with you on social media, Julie Lyles Carr at Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and make sure you're also checking out All Mom Does. Awesome blog with all kinds of great information and inspiration for your mom journey. And you can find All Mom Does on all the social places as well, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Next week, I have Phil and Diane Comer. They have a fantastic new book out called Raising Passionate Jesus Followers. And we want to make sure that you are with us for that conversation next week. So be sure and subscribe, and be sure and tell your friends about the Modern Motherhood podcast. A big shout out and thank you to our producer, Donna Toti, and also to our content coordinator, Rebecca Beckett. They're the ones that help make it all happen. I'm your host, Julie Lyles Carr, and we can't wait to see you next week with our guests, Phil and Diane Comer.